They think you cut everyone off. From the outside, that's the easiest story to tell. Messages unanswered, invitations declined, a sudden absence where there used to be constant availability. People fill the silence with assumptions because it's uncomfortable to imagine another explanation. But what they don't see is that you weren't disappearing by leaving. You were disappearing by staying. The quiet you're living in now didn't arrive randomly. It wasn't a mood. It wasn't bitterness or apathy. It was something your body constructed slowly, deliberately, after years of overriding itself. This silence isn't an empty space. It's a structure, a refuge, something you built piece by piece when ignoring your limits stopped being possible. You didn't wake up one day and decide to withdraw. You practiced for years without realizing it. You practiced every time you let a call go to voicemail because you couldn't summon the energy to perform warmth. Every time you typed "I'm busy" and felt a strange sense of relief instead of guilt. Every time you canceled plans and noticed your body relax instead of tense. This wasn't about pushing people away. It was about finally stopping the constant, invisible labor of pulling them towards you, carrying conversations, managing emotions, sustaining closeness that was never fully reciprocated. It was about recognizing that the thing you were protecting wasn't time or productivity or independence. It was your internal stillness, and it was nearly gone. You didn't start out this way. You didn't begin life craving quiet. You were someone who believed in noise and conversation, in shared laughter, and being woven tightly into other people's lives. You were the reliable one, the listener, the person others leaned on when their world cracked open. You remembered birthdays. You showed up late at night. You knew how to hold space when someone else fell apart. Your love was an action. Your presence was a service. And for a long time, you believed this was the highest form of love. To be needed, to be useful, to be strong enough not to ask for much in return. At first, it even felt meaningful, necessary, like purpose. But strength, when it's never allowed to soften, doesn't stay strength. It hardens. And usefulness, when it's never reciprocated, slowly turns into erasure. You didn't notice it happening. Almost no one does. What began forming inside you wasn't resentment, but a ledger, a quiet, unconscious accounting of energy, of how often you reached out versus how often someone reached back, of how much emotional labor you provided compared to how little was returned. One day, without anger or drama, you checked the balance, and it was devastatingly empty. You weren't furious. You weren't even sad in the way you used to be. Instead, there was numbness, a hollow clarity, the kind that arrives when your system has been warning you for years and finally gives up on subtlety. You stopped feeling hurt when plans were forgotten. You stopped feeling disappointed by the shallow responses. The pain dulled, and that scared you more than heartbreak ever did. Because numbness isn't peace, it's a warning sign. Your nervous system had been collecting evidence all along. Every time you shared something vulnerable, and it was met with indifference. Every time your availability was treated like entitlement. Every time you gave from an empty place, and were still expected to give more. Your body learned a rule your mouth never spoke. Proximity to others equals depletion of self. So it stepped in. Not loudly, not cruelly, quietly. You didn't reply slower to punish anyone. You replied slower because each notification triggered a small, involuntary calculation in your chest. How much peace will this cost me? You didn't stop sharing joy out of bitterness. You stopped because muted responses felt like tiny losses you couldn't afford anymore. And when you finally stopped reaching, the first thing you felt wasn't loneliness. It was relief, a deep, unsettling relief. As if a constant internal hum, the effort of managing, anticipating, performing, suddenly went silent. Your sleep deepened. The static in your mind softened. Breathing felt real again. This is the part no one talks about. The peace. The peace of no longer being an emotional convenience store, open at all hours for everyone else's needs, while quietly starving yourself. But peace, when it first arrives, doesn't come alone. Because once the noise dies down, something else starts to speak, and you realize the silence isn't empty at all. It's crowded with ghosts. Part 2. The ghosts that follow the quiet. The ghosts don't arrive all at once. They slip in quietly, disguised as thoughts, memories, alternate timelines. They aren't the people themselves. They're the versions you hoped they would become. The conversations you imagined. The understanding you believed was just one more explanation away. You grieve potential, not reality. And that's a lonely kind of grief, because how do you explain mourning something that never fully existed? How do you admit that choosing peace still hurts? You were the one who walked away. You were the one who stopped responding. You were the one who chose silence. So why does it feel like loss? The grief doesn't look dramatic. It looks like stillness with an ache beneath it. Like catching yourself rehearsing a message you'll never send. Like remembering a version of yourself that still believed effort could fix everything. And in that stillness, another voice grows louder. The critic. It sounds reasonable, calm, almost caring. You're too sensitive. You expect too much. You're the common denominator. If this keeps happening, maybe the problem is you. That voice didn't appear out of nowhere. It's an echo built from years of being subtly taught that your needs were inconvenient, that your feelings were excessive, that being low maintenance was something to be proud of. Maybe you learned early that sadness made people uncomfortable, that asking for reassurance strained relationships, that being easy to love meant needing very little. So you adapted. You learned to fold yourself smaller, to preempt disappointment by not expecting much, to offer care freely while quietly dismissing your own exhaustion. You became skilled at self-containment not because it empowered you, but because it kept you safe. As an adult, you didn't randomly choose your relationships. You followed the map you were given. You were drawn to emotionally unavailable people not because you liked pain, but because their distance felt familiar. You knew how to survive there. You knew the rules. Your role was already written. Giver, waiter, hopeful one. Every time they let you down, it hurt, but it also confirmed the blueprint. This is what connection feels like. This is what you deserve. Leaving wasn't just leaving them. It was defying the map. And when you abandon a map in unfamiliar territory, panic follows. That's what the critic really is. Fear wearing the mask of logic. A desperate attempt to drag you back toward what's known, even if what's known was slowly erasing you. The silence isn't the danger. Being without instructions is. So the voice gets louder. It romanticizes the past. It reframes your exhaustion as failure. It tells you that maybe being depleted was better than being alone. But here's the truth most people don't learn until much later. That voice doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you're early. You're in the space between who you were trained to be and who you're becoming. And that space feels unsafe, not because it is, but because it's unfamiliar. You don't need to silence the critic. You don't need to defeat it. You need to see it clearly. It's an outdated guard dog, trained during a time when shrinking kept you connected. It doesn't know that survival no longer requires self-erasure. It barks because open ground feels dangerous. And this is where the real work begins. Not by rushing back into connection, not by numbing yourself with distraction, but by staying present long enough to learn a new way of relating first to yourself. Because the next phase isn't about other people at all. It's about becoming someone you no longer need to escape from. Part 3. becoming the one who stays. The transformation doesn't announce itself. It unfolds quietly in ordinary moments that don't look heroic from the outside. You stop forcing yourself to respond when you're depleted. You cancel plans without constructing elaborate explanations. You let sadness exist without rushing to fix it. For the first time, you listen to yourself. This is reparenting, though it doesn't look like perfection or constant self-soothing. It looks like reliability. You keep the promises you make to yourself. You rest when you're tired. You stop negotiating with your limits. You begin asking a question you once avoided. What do I need right now? And more importantly, you start treating the answer as valid. At first, this feels uncomfortable, even wrong. You've been conditioned to believe that tending to your needs is selfish. That rest must be earned. That boundaries are something you justify. But slowly, something steadies. You notice that loneliness still appears, but it doesn't consume you the way it used to. Doubt still visits, but it no longer dictates your behavior. In their place, trust begins to grow, not trust in others, trust in yourself. You learn who you are when you're not performing usefulness. You rediscover interests you abandoned because no one shared them. You develop opinions that don't need agreement to exist. You begin enjoying your own company not as a consolation prize, but as something genuinely nourishing. You become someone you can stay with. From this self-containment, your understanding of connection starts to change. The old model was extreme. You were either completely open, absorbing everything, or completely shut down, door or wall. Neither worked. The new model is different. Imagine your inner world as a house. The most vulnerable parts of you live inside. The old version of you either let everyone walk straight through the front door or barricaded the windows. Now, you build a porch, a space that belongs to you, where connection can happen without intrusion. Conversations can live there. Laughter, shared presence. And when it becomes too much, you can step back inside without apology, without explanation. This porch is built from discernment. Discernment isn't judgment or cynicism. It's bodily wisdom. It's noticing how your body responds to someone's presence. Does your chest tighten or soften? Does seeing their name feel like obligation or ease? You learn to offer partial presence. You stop believing that love requires 100% performance. You say things like, I have an hour, or I don't have the capacity to advise, but I can listen. And something surprising happens. Real connection doesn't wither under these limits. It deepens. Because authenticity is sustainable in a way self-abandonment never was. But as you begin to change, the world responds. Not everyone welcomes a version of you that no longer overextends. Some people feel confused. Others feel threatened. Your availability used to be a constant, now it's conditional. And that shift doesn't go unnoticed. Because when you stop overgiving, you don't just change your life, you change the room. Part 4. When boundaries change the room. Some people celebrate your growth. Others resist it. Not openly, not dramatically, but in small, telling ways. Guilt disguised as concern. Comments about how different you've become. Pressure to explain, to reassure, to return to who you were. Not because that version of you is healthier, but because it was easier to access. Your boundaries disrupt patterns that benefited others. Your no introduces friction where there once was flow. And suddenly, the absence of your constant presence feels personal. This is where many people falter. They confuse discomfort with wrongdoing. They mistake resistance for proof that they've become cold or uncaring. They retreat not because they're wrong, but because the pressure is familiar. But this moment matters, because this is where integrity is tested. You're learning a new language now, one where burden becomes boundary, where selfish becomes self-respect, where alone becomes self-contained. This isn't about cutting people off. It's about cultivating your inner world intentionally, like tending soil after a long famine. You choose what gets planted. You choose what receives water and time. And slowly, quietly, alignment begins to replace exhaustion. Your connections become fewer, but truer, simpler, reciprocal. You leave interactions feeling energized instead of hollowed out. You stop explaining your worth. You start living it. The noise fades. And one day, without ceremony, you realize something startling. The silence that once felt frightening now feels spacious, not empty, spacious. Space to think, space to feel, space to choose. But space isn't the end of the journey. It's the beginning of agency. Because now, for the first time, you're not reacting, you're deciding. End of Part 4. Part 5. Choosing what enters the quiet. The quiet around you now isn't absence. It's potential. It's the space where you decide what belongs, not out of habit, not out of guilt, but out of resonance. You let in laughter that doesn't cost you peace, conversations that don't require performance, presence that meets you where you are. You don't return to who you were. You integrate who you've become. You learn that strength can be soft, that love doesn't demand self-erasure, that connection doesn't require constant availability to be real. You stop abandoning yourself in the name of closeness, and the world doesn't end. You are no longer lost in the noise of everyone else's needs. You hear your intuition clearly now. It speaks quietly but with certainty. And for the first time, you listen, you stay.